The idea that the Emperor of Mankind might have already become the Dark King is one of those concepts that sits right at the bleeding edge of modern Warhammer 40,000 lore, half explicit revelation and half unsettling implication. On the surface, the story told in The End and the Death seems clear enough. In the final confrontation with Horus, the Emperor stands on the brink of apotheosis, drawing on such unimaginable psychic power that he begins to resemble a fifth Chaos God in the making. He recognises what that path would mean, sees the future it would create, and deliberately turns away from it. He chooses restraint. He chooses humanity over godhood. But what I keep coming back to, and what many readers quietly wonder, is whether that decision actually mattered in the long run. Because in a very real sense, the Emperor of the 41st millennium already fulfills many of the criteria that defined the Dark King in the Siege of Terra novels. The Dark King was not simply an individual, it was a metaphysical role, a position within the warp defined by domination, order through annihilation, and absolute psychic supremacy. During the climax of The End and the Death Volume 3, we are told that the Dark King is a potential future, an emergent god born from humanity's fear, rage, and desperation. The Emperor rejects becoming that entity in the moment, but the galaxy did not stop producing those emotions simply because he refused them. 10,000 years have passed since the decision, 10,000 years of worship on a scale no being in the setting has ever received. Quadrillions of humans direct their fear, hope, hatred, and obedience towards the Emperor every single day. Entire civilizations exist solely to venerate him. In the warp, belief has power, emotion has power. Repetition and ritual have power. The Chaos Gods themselves are living proof of this. And so the uncomfortable question emerges. Even if the Emperor refused to become the Dark King then, has the Imperium effectively forced him into that role anyway? I sometimes think about how different the Emperor we see in the Heresy era is from the presence described in the modern books. In Master of Mankind, he still feels like a person, distant and terrifying but fundamentally coherent. By the time we reach Dark Imperium and Godblight, he is something else entirely. Guilliman's encounter with him is not a conversation but an assault of raw psychic impression, commands layered over warnings, love tangled with contempt, urgency mixed with alien detachment. That is not the mind of a man, it is the voice of a vast inhuman force. And when I read those passages, I can't help but wonder whether we are already seeing the early stages of the Dark King made manifest. One of the defining characteristics of the Dark King, as described in the Siege novels, is that it would be a god of human dominion, born from humanity's darkest impulses, the desire to control, to survive at any cost, to crush all opposition in the name of order. Look at the Imperium as it exists now and tell me that that doesn't sound familiar. The modern Imperium is a civilization built on repression, xenophobia, endless war, and religious absolutism. And at the centre of it all sits the Emperor empowered by that very system. Whether he intended it or not, the psychic focus of the most brutal regime imaginable. And I'll be honest, there is a grim irony to it that I find almost poetic. The Emperor spent his entire life trying to prevent humanity from falling into superstition and blind faith. Now he is sustained entirely by superstition and blind faith. He tried to stop the birth of a new Chaos God, and 10,000 years later, he may have become one through sheer historical momentum. Books like The Emperor's Legion and The Regent's Shadow reinforce this transformation indirectly. The Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, who are closer to the throne than almost anyone, do not describe the Emperor as a suffering man in need of rescue. They describe him as an overwhelming presence, a force of nature that shapes reality around itself. Saints manifest in his name, miracles occur on battlefields, demons recoil at his light. These are not the abilities of a wounded perpetual clinging to life. These are the acts of a nascent god. And yet the process is clearly not complete. The Dark King envisioned in the Siege of Terra was a being of immediate apocalyptic transformation. What we see now is slower, more insidious. The Emperor's power grows, but so does his alienation from humanity. His interventions become more dramatic, burning Nurgle's garden in godblight, possessing Guilliman's sword with divine fire, but they are also more incomprehensible. It feels less like the return of a benevolent ruler and more like the gradual awakening of something vast and dangerous. Another piece of the puzzle comes from the way the warp itself has changed since the opening of the Great Rift. Psychic activity is more intense than ever. Faith has tangible effects. The Emperor's influence reaches further and manifests more openly. If the warp is a mirror of emotion and belief, then the Imperium has spent millennia polishing that mirror to reflect one image above all others, the God Emperor. In that environment, refusing apotheosis once may no longer be enough. The collective will of humanity might be dragging him towards it regardless. And I think that's the part that unsettles me the most. The Emperor may no longer be in control of his own destiny. He sits on the Golden Throne in constant agony, forced to absorb the psychic output of an entire species. Even if he wanted to remain merely a man, the Imperium would never allow it. Their prayers, sacrifices and expectations shape him as surely as any ritual. In trying to preserve him, humanity may have remade him into the very thing he once feared becoming. And there's also darker theological angles to consider. The Chaos Gods are not conscious architects in the way mortals understand the term. They are emergent entities formed from emotion and belief. If the Emperor is becoming the Dark King, it may not require his consent at all. It might simply be the inevitable result of 10,000 years of psychic reinforcement. In that sense, the decision he made aboard the Vengeful Spirit could have been less a final rejection and more a temporary delay. Recent novels like The End and the Death make it clear that the Dark King was always tied specifically to humanity. Unlike the existing Chaos Gods which feed upon universal emotion, the Dark King would be a god born from the human experience alone. That description matches the Emperor's current role almost perfectly. He is not worshipped by aliens, he is not empowered by demons, his domain is exclusively mankind. The parallels are hard to ignore. I find myself torn on this idea. Part of me wants to believe the Emperor remains fundamentally opposed to chaos, that his essence is still fighting against corruption. And there is evidence for that. His power is anathema to demons. He burns away Nurgle's corruption, he shields humanity from the warp rather than enslaving it. Those are not the actions of a typical Chaos God. But then again, the Dark King was never meant to be typical. It was meant to be something new, something uniquely terrible. And maybe that's the key point. The Dark King does not have to look like Khorne or Nurgle to still be a warp entity. It could be a god of order instead of madness, of control instead of excess, a god that claims to protect humanity while demanding endless sacrifice in return. When framed that way, the distinction between the God Emperor of the Imperium and the Dark King becomes uncomfortably thin. I also think about what Guilliman perceives during his resurrection. He does not feel the comforting presence of a wise father. He feels an entity of immense power that barely resembles a person at all. That moment in Dark Imperium reads less like a reunion and more like an audience with something transcendent and dangerous. If the Emperor has not become the Dark King, he is at least moving in a direction that looks disturbingly similar. Of course, there are counter-arguments. The Emperor still fights chaos relentlessly. His power actively opposes the warp rather than empowering it. He has not claimed dominion over demons or reshaped reality in the way a true god could. From that perspective, he remains a fundamentally different kind of being, something uniquely human elevated to terrifying heights rather than a new chaos deity. But even that distinction might be temporary. Gods in Warhammer 40,000 are not born fully formed. They grow, they evolve. Slaanesh gestated for millennia before finally awakening. Perhaps the Emperor's current state is simply the larval stage of the Dark King, an apotheosis stretched across 10,000 years instead of a single catastrophic moment. I suppose what makes this whole topic so fascinating is that the setting refuses to give a definitive answer. Every new book adds evidence in both directions. He is the anathema to chaos, yet he grows more godlike by the century. He rejected the Dark King once, yet the galaxy increasingly treats him as if he already occupies the role. The truth may be that he exists in a liminal state, balanced forever between what he was and what he might become. And from a thematic standpoint, that feels exactly right. Warhammer 40,000 thrives on tragic irony. The Emperor tried to save humanity from gods, and in doing so, may have become the greatest and most terrifying god of all. Whether we call that being the Emperor, the God Emperor, or the Dark King might ultimately be a matter of perspective. Sometimes I wonder if, deep within whatever remains of his consciousness, the Emperor understands this, if he can feel himself changing, pulled further and further from the ideals he once held, if he knows that the Imperium's love and devotion are slowly transforming him into something that he never wanted to be. It is a bleak thought, but then again, bleak thoughts are the lifeblood of this universe. The more that I look at the modern lore, the harder it becomes to draw a clean line between what the Emperor is and what the Dark King was prophesied to be. Perhaps the most honest answer is that the transformation is already underway, neither fully complete nor fully avoidable. A god in the making, forged not by a single choice on the bridge of the vengeful spirit, but by 10,000 years of suffering, faith and endless war. Still growing, still changing, and still terrifyingly unfinished. If you'd like to support the channel, please like and hype the video in the comment section below, subscribe and check back for daily videos. The best way to help us keep creating videos is to become a channel member down below, where you'll get access to new videos early. This archive has now been fully decoded. Continue your journey with the video displayed on screen. The vast wealth of the archives continues to reveal new knowledge of the dark history of the 40k verse. In the grim dark of the far future, there is only war.